Your data is essentially the fingerprint of how your business runs. When you go into the average enterprise, you typically don't consider data an asset. It's really the outcome for business use case. If you're not contextualizing that data, you're never going to be able to really simulate how the business or the industry runs. The way that health plays out in our lives is way different than what the transactional footprint looks like in the middle and the back office. But we use that information and then try to figure out how to engage. You can't be AI ready if your data isn't interconnected, interoperable. All too often, these enterprises just take what they have and throw something like AI at it. They just took the same data construct, threw new algorithms at it, and search and chatbots didn't get any better because the underlying information didn't change. Premiums go up every 3 to 4 years. Benefits in the coverage haven't really changed. Most consumers out there aren't going around telling people how happy they are with their health insurance plan. That data can do is start to open up the benefits and features that are in these healthcare products.
Welcome to the Pulse Check podcast. With me here today is David Frankenfield. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, good to have you. You just came over from Singapore and it was a good opportunity to talk to you. And as life has it, you will stay here in Hong Kong for the longer time, I heard.
Yeah, I'm transitioning to make Hong Kong my home. Personally and professionally as well.
Yeah, I just mentioned to you earlier that I did the same move. I came from Singapore, was 3 years in Singapore, now since 10 years here, permanent resident. So maybe in 10 years from now, I ask you again if you're still here. So thank you for making the time once more. Typically, I start with an icebreaker. I would love to hear more about you. So what makes you you, David?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'd like to mention is I did 4.5 years in the Marine Corps, United States Marine Corps. If you haven't figured it out so far, yes, I'm from the United States. I always consider it kind of my first, kind of school of leadership. But as we discussed earlier, I wasn't really clear what I wanted to do when I first got out of high school. So I thought it was a good place to, kind of take time out, 4 years, figure it out. And of course, went in Marine Corps Infantry back in 98, got out in 2002. And basically, figured that I wanted to get into industrial engineering or operations research. So that's probably the first thing that I would mention. It's such a core part of who I am, or my leadership principles, or how I show up every single day, work, professionally, personally. I think the other thing, and we'll probably reference my experience prior to Asia quite a bit. I spent 16 years with United Health Group, probably the largest healthcare company in the world. Obviously, they're known for the insurance at United Healthcare, but what a lot of people don't realize is that Optum, the kind of service side, is now not only the majority of their revenue, but has certain characteristics like it's the largest. They own the largest share of the provider market, somewhere between 13 to 15%. Optum Care does nowadays. Mm-hmm. And as we also discussed, I was very lucky to work for that company for 16 years, and being in the data and the analytics side, being in kind of the sitting with the business and the technology teams, was able to work across kind of that microcosm. In a way to, aside from, maybe pharmaceutical or medical device manufacturing, really be able to service the entire value chain of healthcare, even though it was within that company. I did 2 years in Ireland, helping them with, kind of commercial optimization and what, kind of that location, that geography is typically used for a corporate perspective. So I've had some direct corporate, kind of capability building and exposure, product building. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's really set me up well for where I am today, 16 years after that. Last 3 years, as you mentioned, I spent in Singapore. But then personally, being a bit of an older gentleman, what really makes me unique is that I'm still in the relentless pursuit of becoming a jiu-jitsu black belt.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I'm working on that. In May, my partner and I I'm going to do my first high rocks.
Oh,
so,
cool.
Yeah, everybody that I've talked to kind of has the same reaction. They tell me good luck. So we'll be doing that in May in Hong Kong. But yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to live my best life. And as you said, that's going to be in Hong Kong.
That's cool to hear. So there's a few things we have in common. It's not the jiu-jitsu, but sports in general, high rocks. I also, as a Swiss, had to go through military service about the same time as you went through. Plus, also, we have an engineering background. And one of the topics today, besides, of course, the industry, healthcare, is on data and data science at the right time where there's also all the buzz about data and AI, especially when it comes to healthcare. If you are into sports like yourself, I'm a geek when it comes to data, health data, and I use now also AI constantly on my mobile phone to track everything I do. I also started to build now agents that when I go for a long run here in Hong Kong, something to enjoy. Once you're settled, then I take pictures of the gels that I take along the way and then calculate the calories and everything to make sure I have my nutritions in. Before we go into AI, which of course everyone is excited about, maybe start with healthcare data in general and basically the last frontier for insurers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, how many years have we been going to conferences and people talk about democratization of the data? If you go back even a decade ago, when Hadoop and big data was kind of the cutting edge, you thought the work would have been done by now. So there is something perplexing about whether it's just any organization in any industry in leveraging their data, but particularly in insurance, and I think even more so in health insurance. Being in Asia for 3 years, it really just kind of solidified some of my opinions that I've been carrying with me, or hypotheses that I've been carrying with me. And I think the first thing I would say is that when you go into the average enterprise, and particularly in insurance, where you're so focused on what the core kind of value proposition is to the market, you typically don't consider data an asset. It's really kind of the outcome of some sort of business use case, and I see that a lot. Kind of in the region here, still happens quite a bit in the United States, but I would like to think that to compare and contrast my experience there in the U.S. over the last probably 5 to 8 years. There was quite a monumental shift in the way that we thought about data, and obviously something that I'm hoping to bring to the region. You go into an organization and you go talk to a technology team, and at best what you get is some sort of architecture diagram with a bunch of icon candy in there. But for the people that are administering assets, they have no idea what those assets actually do, what information's in there, what transactions they support. They just want to make sure that the light is green all day long. And then if you go into a middle back office operation, you're lucky if they have some sort of business process diagram, kind of shows you how things bounce around. But nobody in these enterprises are really the expert on how do you go from kind of the system of record into the value that the business actually generates. And I think that's kind of that middle ground that I like to focus on. I mean, you can easily call it like the information system. And if you do, I just think we've taken it for granted too long. And I know, like you said, we're going to talk about AI, what AI ready really means. I think the majority of the work there is like really thinking through what does the information system of healthcare really need to look like, whether you're on the front end or the back end of this. At the end of the day, and I think this is a very popular opinion since Gen AI became mainstream, which is not only is your data your protective moat, but your data is essentially the fingerprint of how your business runs. And if you're not contextualizing that data, and only using what comes out of these transactional platforms, then you're never going to be able to really simulate like how the business or the industry runs, or you can't innovate in a way that you can go back and say, if I had this solution 6 months ago, how do I use my data asset to tell me like what the impact of that would have been? And I see that a lot right now, where a lot of the data that people use, it's highly transactional. It's very difficult to ask simple questions. End to end, they can't simulate their own business. And I think for an industry that, one of the more popular kind of monikers is, helping individuals live healthier lives, or what does it mean to be individualization in this industry? They can't trace an individual as they use different types of resources, as they go through their own journey. I mean, the way that health plays out in our lives is way different than what the transactional footprint looks like in the middle and the back office. But we use that information and then try to figure out how to engage with somebody as health and life plays out for them.
Yeah, this is an interesting point. There were these trends here with, for example, Manulife Move of tracking the steps you do on a daily basis. While, yeah, of course, the more steps you do, 10, 20,000 a day, at least you are moving, right? But there's so many other health data points that are more important. I, of course, constantly read up myself in terms of even your resting heart rate, how important it actually is, and your heart rate variability. And of course, nowadays everyone has watches and other sensors to track this. And I'm sure people, they want to know if they're healthy. It's a big trend, also with Brian Johnson in the US, who comes and shows that you can live much longer and maybe even almost forever. Right. But I also do feel that if you go to health insurance, for example, there's a health check at the very beginning, especially if you sign up for a big life insurance. But there is not really support in regular health checks. Plus, also as you alluded to, high rocks and sports, there could also be health checks being provided right next to a Hyrox competition and other events. And maybe with this, they could upsell you some other perks and benefits and so on. But I don't see much. So while it's such a big trend in terms of healthcare and data tracking and so on, I don't feel it's leveraged as much. Is that just me, or would you confirm that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, so if you take my previous response as just being, why is the existing data not fully being leveraged? I think the idea of, there's this concept that I call dark data in healthcare that nobody's really focusing on. And it's essentially what you just said, but basically all this other disparate data that's coming up, whether it's from edge devices or, maybe other pieces of technology that are engaged in somebody's life for a totally different reason. I mean, if you really think about, the old adage or the kind of the Pareto philosophy of 20% of the members drive 80% of the cost, right? As you become more critically ill, the critical few drive, right, the significant cost. Those events are essentially very longitudinal lifestyle decisions. I mean, when somebody, for the most part, becomes ill with something like diabetes, that wasn't because of the decision they made last month.
Yeah.
So if you really start thinking about the data that's required to really help people, and if you really want to get into, disease avoidance instead of disease management, then there's this whole opportunity around what is the dark data of healthcare, and how do you figure out what that data is? How do you kind of create business capabilities or value propositions, like you mentioned, like Move or AI has Vitality. When I was at UHG, it was Rally for Health. But even those today, I think, are under leveraged, right? I mean, at best, you have, if you're lucky, and not all of them, have access to some of the claim information that the members generate. They obviously all connect to edge devices, but are they really aggregating it together in a way that can be fully taken advantage of? And then as we start thinking about the AI opportunity here, what other information is out there that would be extremely useful, even if we're still asking or trying to answer the same question, like how do I maybe lose weight, or how do I sleep better? Things like life milestones start becoming important. The daily stress activity, the fact that what's your kind of household situation. These things become really important on a day-to-day basis. But we don't think about it that way in health today. We really just look at like what's the data that's right in front of us, and then we think that we're going to have some sort of lifestyle impact or behavioral influence that's going to drastically show up in actuarial medical cost curves. And sometimes it does, right? I mean, we have the ability to influence sometimes the way that care is delivered. But if we want to really do this at scale, I really think we need to think differently about what data are we not taking advantage of that's either out there, or the next big question is what data do we think we need that doesn't exist, and what are we going to do about that?
Before we go into the AI topic, a follow-up in terms of data in terms of data governance and of course, the sensitivity around it in Switzerland, that's a big topic. And back then, when there was a shift of having database, of storing your data, going away from the old manual books that your doctors had, of really being concerned what happens with my health data. And in Switzerland, it's as protected as the financial data in the banks. So really safe. And of course, markets differentiate here also a bit in terms of how data is being handled, but of course, it's always sensitive. Mm-hmm. In an ideal world, I say this always in the context of banking, your customer data. I would have loved to have it in my own blockchain, and I can just give it to a bank if they need it. The same with data, that I can actually really store the data I have, maybe also from my smart watch, but also reports from doctors and so on, and then give it also to my health insurance on request, and especially also as and when in need. How do you see it then in terms of data protection? What should happen and needs to come next?
Yeah.
Also then in light of then AI afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, let's break down what you just stated into parts, and first start talking about globally what's regulatory and compliance differences. And I'll tell you that the legalese that I see in a lot of the regulations here is really not much different than what we have in the United States. So I would like to believe, optimistically, it's a timing issue. Maybe a little bit more of an experience issue. But to make a little bit of a joke here, right? I mean, we all know that, just because the legalese states something, it's all about interpretation. So the example that I use quite a bit, and this is what helped us in the United States, and it's something that I've literally read here, in one particular market, there was a clause. And the client that I was working with basically said, look, even though you want to encode the PHI and the PII, we don't think that we can give it to you. And I asked very nicely if I could see kind of the regulation and read it. Not my favorite thing to do, but sometimes it's necessary. And there was language in there that basically said you can actually share PHI and PII with a third-party client if it's in support of what they deemed as normal healthcare operations. And very simply, I said, isn't fraud, waste, and abuse normal healthcare operations? And so I think it really is an interpretation. And I can understand why it makes people feel uncomfortable. Only being in the region for 3 years, I obviously don't take for granted how difficult this space might have been before I've gotten here. Part of the reason for me coming to the region now was, thinking that it was the right time to, maybe progress some of these more difficult issues. So I don't think it's necessarily a regulatory issue as much as it is who the true innovators and disruptors. How do they, in a way, flip the paradigm on regulatory compliance and governance to not just say no, but to take a step back and figure out, if we were going to say yes, what position do we need to take? What interpretation do we need to take to make that happen? Because I think the way that the regulatory kind of structure is set up, it's all there, just like it is in the United States. So it's just who's really going to be the brave few that kind of take that lead.
So you answered already part of my next question then. So in terms of readiness, AI ready, what does a health insurer need to do to be AI ready? So besides the regulatory aspects? Yeah,
I mean, so, the next thing I think about is, you said it yourself. I mean, I'd use you as a bit of a working example, right? Like, you can't be AI ready if your data isn't, interconnected, basically interoperable in there to be leveraged by AI itself. There's a lot of organizations today that, not just in the region, but I think globally, that still have difficulties, getting the different divisions of their business to work together. And this always goes back to, this kind of argument of like centralized control versus distributed or kind of federated. I've asked this, or I've answered this question several times, and it's not a question of like, is there one correct model? I think depending on what capability we're talking about and where your business is, for something like data, I do believe you can have localized control, but at the same time, we all need to be rowing the boat in the same direction. And sometimes that needs to come from top-down leadership. And in that case, do you have federated policy or centralized policy, data policy, usage and rights policies, on top of what could be a fully distributed, kind of local market level model? I think where you have the most difficulty is when you don't have that multiple layer or strategy in that approach. And when you decide to say, look, I'm going to give more authority back to the local markets, there's no incentive for them to aggregate their data together. There's no incentive for them to work together. Now, I've gotten the question for the last 3 years as we've tried to aggregate data together. What's in it for that given single market? And sometimes the answer is nothing. Sometimes the answer is it's for our company or for us to be able to build other capabilities that they're going to get value out of. So I think that's part of the trick moving forward, particularly now, if I bring it back to the region, is how do you take, basically a region that's very fragmented, right? I mean, if you take Singapore, for example, right? I mean, I think with the foreigner population, 6.6 million people, right? Is that really enough data to look at like sparse event detection? Is AI going to respond to every, very rare condition that drives tremendous cost? Is there enough information there? Does that information from that market need to be combined with another market? So how do you kind of create in a corporate setting a construct then that allows you to do that? And I think that's probably the next, on top of the governance and regulatory, is almost in a way the operating model around data and the governance around data and trying to figure out how do you separate out what might be kind of your general operating model versus what do we need to do from a corporate data usage and rights perspective on data and information. I think the last part of this, and to me it's the most important part, and it goes back to a little bit what I was saying before, the idea of transactional data versus like the data of reality, lifestyle data. All too often, I think these enterprises just take what they have and then they throw something like AI at it, and they hope something dramatically is going to change. Now, don't get me wrong, it will get better, right? I mean, we all saw the same thing back in 2017, 2018, when Google obviously kind of released all their transformer work. But what did we see in a lot of corporates? They just took the same data construct, threw new algorithms at it, and search and chatbots didn't get any better, right? Because, I mean, the underlying information didn't change. And so I think in that time period, we saw an entire industry emerge around tagging data sets. Really, that's contextualization. And I think there's, in healthcare, a lot of contextualization that needs to happen to take full advantage of AI. At Amplify Health in the last 3 years, right, we were going through and basically codifying with international standards every single claim in every single market that we were working in. That's one example of contextualization. Or if you think about even in claims administration processes, most claim insurtech in health businesses is legacy life tech. So the purpose of that technology is to just cut a check. And so they weren't collecting things like the line level details on the claims. That's contextualization. So, back to what is the information system of healthcare? You can't just take the data models, the physical data models that are coming out of your insurtech, your transactional tech. You got to invest time and intelligence around contextualizing it so that then the AI can actually do something other than, what a highly skilled analyst can do. Because if that's the case, the most value you're going to get out of it is like some OpEx efficiency and not a real business breakthrough.
But do you think our clients like ourselves open to share with their health insurance providers? Again, they were open to track steps. But what else do you think would work in this industry? Yeah,
I mean, personally, I think we're all torn on this, right? I mean, and it's not about the idea of do you have something to hide or is something sensitive to share, but right, it's a delicate balance between this is highly personal, but then at the same time, we all want to reap the benefit of sharing our information. And I think what needs to be more industrialized is this idea of how do we kind of separate out, obviously, the personalization, whether that's at like the point of engagement versus then how does that information get leveraged whether it's in a business or within the technology of AI itself. And I think within a corporate, the faster they can figure out how to separate those two things out, the faster they're going to be able to innovate at scale. But from an industry perspective, I think that's also key. Just even looking with some of the government agencies that I've tried to work with over the last 5 to 10 years, right? You can imagine one of the first topics that comes up is data sensitivity, back to the whole PII thing. And as you said, Simpulse does a lot of work in financial services. It's a very similar problem that the industry went through 10, 15, maybe even longer ago on how to separate those two things out. So I think it's almost like there needs to be like an industrialization of the separation or security around identity, and then the actual information that's associated to these individuals. I make kind of a reference all the time around, of course I own my name, my address, my age, my identification number. And as I submit a claim, that's associated to an ICD code, or it's associated to a price value for the claim or the service. If I separate those two things out, and if you think about it, all that other information is generated on technology that I as an individual don't own, right? So if the company owns the transaction and I own my personal data, of course, when you put those two things together, that record, I have some sort of ownership over. But if you can figure out how to detach the two, then I think it conceptually kind of opens up the aperture for people to then obviously not only feel more comfortable in sharing, but then obviously for innovators to be able to use that data en masse, and not have to necessarily worry about obviously, kind of the negative impact of kind of the security and governance around that.
It's very interesting as you now make a comparison to financial services, banking as example. I was just thinking of if you onboard in a private bank as a high net worth individual, you have the whole source of wealth corroboration as part of the KYC onboarding procedure. And of course, you want to know where is the money coming from, also in terms of AML compliance and so on. And when I went through the health check last year for a life insurance policy, they could have just, in my case, gone online and check my Strava data and so on. I'm quite open. People know me and they could check because they first, of course, the doctor looked at my resting heart rate and felt like, 45 is quite low. Did you just sleep? No, actually, it's always that low. And they could have also leveraged more data. Mm-hmm. Do you think they should be, or is there a reason they don't?
Well, I think there's two sides to that coin on that question, right? First off, let me start with, you obviously don't want to enable bias or undue selection for resources, right? If you look at what the EU AI Act was trying to do, there's if I'm correct on this, there's a statement in there that basically says it regulates anything that has to do algorithmically with the distribution of resources, right? And it isn't the idea in general. It's about, they just don't want people to bias the distribution of resources. Mm-hmm. So certainly nobody would agree to that, right? So we have to figure that piece out. But the flip side of that, I think there's a lot of interesting things that can be done, right? If you look at insurance and health insurance in general, I think where the industry needs to go is basically taking us away from the traditional way that risk is modeled, either at an individual or a book or at a corporate level. For people that are in the industry, we've been talking about value-based care and capitation for a very long time, basically handing over the risk to the upstream, to the provider side or provision side of the value chain. Part of the issue there is that, the way that a health insurer basically models the risk is a lot different, not only at a different scale as you hand that out in pieces to where care is provided, but it's a lot different risk model than as you're a provider and you're looking in year and how do I find the people that I can influence the most so that then I can obviously make a business and make margin on this. Mm-hmm. And I think that's historically been part of the issue. I think mathematically, we're kind of at the apex of that, and obviously, hopefully, AI can help. But I think there's a lot that can be done with the way that we model, and then incorporate some of this other data. Mm-hmm. If I was to just throw this out there as an idea, or people have been flirting with this for a while. I mean, if you look at some insurance companies that have wellness tech, they're still operating on an annualized incentive program. What I have not seen a company do yet is use that type of platform and basically say, look, I can give you now even deeper discounts on your premium. I can open up these other capabilities if I can see you now sustain these levels month on month on month. And as these metrics, these biostats change, right, there might be some sort of sliding scale. But today, it's on January 1st, you get your 15% discount. And by December 31st, I hope you're still a profitable member on my book. So something has to change. And I think to your question, part of that has to be, how do I take advantage of this data that I traditionally haven't? And back to one of the previous questions, is it data I already have access to? Or is it data I think can be useful to open up these new capabilities that I just don't have access to yet? And how am I going to go get that information?
Yeah, and especially in Hong Kong, you will see people love anything that is gamified. And they will for sure also use this to get a few percentages off from their premium. So brings me also to the last question on where do you see the health ecosystem going, let's say in the next 5 to 10 years overall?
Yeah, 5 to 10 years is a big horizon. And I think it's a tale of two possibilities here. And obviously I'm going to start with the more, kind of pessimistic view of this. And if the industry just continues to do what it does, I don't really see a lot changing from a consumer standpoint, right? I mean, and this is a really good segue from the last question. I mean, I think the other thing that data can do in this industry is start to open up the benefits and features that are in these healthcare products. Yeah. I would imagine, I mean, I'm in the industry, but most consumers out there aren't going around, telling people how happy they are with their health insurance plan. The premiums go up every 3 to 4 years by, double digits. The features in the coverage, the benefits in the coverage hasn't really changed. And I know in some cases it's gotten more restrictive. So my pessimistic version of this answer is there's one outcome where a lot of stuff doesn't change. And we talk a lot about AI, and there might be some good internal things that these companies are able to develop, mostly to make their business more efficient. But I don't know how much of that value will ultimately get passed on to the customer, because it's not getting to the core of the core of the idea of I can now economically start thinking about, the product that I'm bringing to market differently. I think the other version of this is, I'm going to start with something that I kind of call the doomsday scenario for insurers. If you look back over the course of the last 4 to 5 years, right, and I'm going to use Microsoft and Apple as a little bit of an example, right? Microsoft acquired a company called Nuance. They were a PAC system aggregator, right? The images, DICOM images. And it's kind of turned into their point of care division, and with some of the technology there. You look at the fact that I believe about 3 years ago, they announced a strategic partnership with Epic, the EMR company. At the same time, Apple was certified as a personal bank, a retail bank, so that they can obviously offer digital services in that sense. Mm-hmm. What's difference between what those platform companies have now put together that an insurance company, essentially needs to operate? Mm-hmm. I mean, outside of the fact, between distribution and agency, the fact that most insurance companies seem to be becoming asset management companies, but at the core of the insurance business, and we used to fear this in the United States all the time, that a non-traditional player could come in and disrupt the entire industry. Obviously, with AI or any other technology or any moment we have in a technology wave, that question gets asked again. And I think there could be some real disruption in this space. I hate to say I've concluded that level of innovation and disruption can't come from an insurance company, because you do have to respect the fact that they have to stay true to their core business and their shareholders. But what's a bit ironic about that is that they actually have all the ingredients necessary to build the type of capabilities that we're all, kind of yearning for. Mm-hmm. So I guess the question is, on my second answer to your question. I think there could be a dramatic change in the future. The one version of this, and I think we've all talked about this idea of, long-run concierge models on personalized hardware. What is your Gen AI or agent that, is been training off of your lifestyle for X number of years? I really do think that that's the future. How that actually impacts the actual corporate part of the healthcare industry today will be interesting, and I don't know if it's going to come from the large companies or not. So that's the side that I'm betting on, for sure. Whether it's for myself personally in my life or even professionally, trying to find a different approach, a different place where, I can disrupt the industry or really figure out where the innovation is going to be coming from.
Maybe last follow-up question on this, if I may. Neuralink, Elon Musk's other company, one of many. Could you see a future where everyone has a chip implant to gather data, if it's then of course also in the benefit of a customer, and in also case of emergency that you can immediately handle and rescue, and also have other support, but as everyone goes with the gadgets and is a geek for data, go as far as Neuralink. Mm-hmm. Would you see that future?
Yeah. So let me answer the question this way. So first off, I'm personally a bit scared of implanting hardware into my body. I think we've seen enough sci-fi movies where when something goes wrong, it goes really wrong. But here's my humorous answer, my funny answer for you. How far away, or what is the difference between Neuralink and the device you have in your pocket right now? And has that really made us any smarter? Right. So I don't think the idea of Neuralink is interesting, but we have all this other technology around us that can detect when there's an emergency situation or we're in distress, or obviously is kind of augmented intelligence already. And probably not fully taking advantage of that. But at the same time, I don't think we necessarily need Neuralink to be able to do that.
Good to know that we don't need to go that far, at least not in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe later on. Thank you so much, David. It's been a pleasure. So maybe just the final one in terms of where can people find you, and if there's anything else you would love to share.
Yeah, so I speak at, or now I'm moderating panel discussions at different conferences in the region. So I won't name any of the conferences, but typically any healthcare or insurance conference, people can find me. Online, I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn. You can imagine there aren't very many David Frankenfields, let alone in healthcare or in Asia. And by the time this podcast comes out, I will be with Braxton Capital Ventures, helping them build their portfolio in the health space and trying to figure out how do we, innovate and disrupt healthcare.
Looking forward to see this. So thank you once again, David, and thank you to the audience. You find us, of course, online on LinkedIn, YouTube, and social media. So with this, Pulse Check once more. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you.